Hi folks, my name is Danny and I am alcoholic. This is the final one of 4 videos where I'm sharing my experience and knowledge of recovery through the simple solution found in this wonderful book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. I'm offering strength and hope to those sharing in the videos. In the first video I shared about the problem, lack of power, essentially step 1. In the second one, I spoke about the solution, the power and the decision, steps 2 and 3. In the third, I discussed how we access the power, steps 4 through to 9. And in this final one, I will explore how we live by the power, steps 10, 11 and 12. How we grow spiritually and live more effectively, thus maintaining recovery. So I'm going to discuss here how we live this simple way of life on a daily basis. It's not just about not drinking. It's also about being fully awake to life. How we serve God and the people around us. Remember the commitment in step 7 that we make, and this is repeated in step 9 actually. The first 9 steps are just the beginning. They are a vital gateway into this way of life, but we need to grow in order to maintain sobriety. Page 84 states, "We have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime." So I'm going to share how we try to live this way of life, how I attempt to live by the principles that several millions of alcoholics and people suffered other addictions have done before me and are doing now all around me actually. So what do we do? Now we often hear of the mechanics, but the key is what Dr. Bob called stick-to-itiveness. We have a daily practice and we have to practice the practice to stick at it day by day. I'll illustrate with it from a film from my childhood that I love. Does anybody remember the film The Karate Kid? Well, in the film, a young lad, Daniel, gets into a scrap with some boys from school. So he goes to an old master, Mr. Miyagi, and asks him to teach him karate. The old man reluctantly agrees. He gets Daniel, or Daniel-san as he calls him, to wax his floor and wax his car and to paint his fence. Wax on, wax off, paint, fence. This goes on for some time, and after a while Daniel gets frustrated and loses it with Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi tries some moves on him, and Daniel-san finds himself easily able to block the moves with the movements he's been practicing while waxing on and waxing off and painting the fence. He is able to block the attack without even thinking about it. In many ways, this is how we grow spiritually in recovery, almost without being aware that we're doing it. And this is done through practice, living in and by the solution, and by doing so, the change happens almost without us even noticing it. Seemingly without any thought or effort on our part. It just happens. So hopefully that illustration sets us up for the idea of what it is to practice our practice. Now it's important to understand that we begin to practice 10 and 11 and to a certain degree step 12 as we commence to make our amends, step 9, as we clean up the past. So we begin step 10 at the same time as we start step 9. Sadly, I've heard folk talk about completing their amends before moving on to step 10. This is madness. You need to be watching for fear and resentment, etc. as you go about in the world and clear up the mess you made. Otherwise, you're going to be making a lot more mess. And there's a lot of fear and there's still so much resentment until we clear up the past. So they're practiced together. Here's the step 10 instruction on page 84. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment and fear, When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So here, what we're doing essentially is watching for our defects of character as they crop up in our lives. For they're a sign that we're slipping back into self. Remember that these are manifestations of self, how self plays out in our lives. They name the 4 basic ones here, but you may have come up with more when you did step 6 from your inventory. These, more specific ones to your personal experience. So it's vital to watch out for these as you go through your day, as you live day by day. For they, don't wait till the end of the day to deal with it. To do so would be deadly dangerous. Why put yourself through the torture? It's a dangerous thing. We live moment by moment. Next, we turn to our God, however we understand God, and ask for the defect to be removed. So we're kind of recommitting to step 7 here. The next instruction is to talk to someone who will understand but be unaffected by what is going on, and to do so as soon as you can. If amends is required, we put things right immediately, as soon as we can, and then we turn our thoughts to someone we can offer our help to. Can you see here how we're committing to God and the people around us in this practice? Again, going back to that step 7 commitment. There's also prayer here, which encapsulates the principles that we need to be practicing, that we need to be working on in the world. Love and tolerance of others is our code. And what's a code? Well, a code's another way of saying a rule, by the way. This is how we have to live to be free from alcohol and anything else for that matter. We must always be considerate of others, but that requires effort, and that requires practice. Can you see how step 10 is pretty much the previous steps, but also linked to steps 11 and 12 too? So it links everything together. One of the big mistakes we make in recovery is we see the steps as some kind of individual unit. No, they're spiritual principles that we practice. There's an order to it to begin with, but we practice everything together. When you look at a flight of stairs, you don't look at the flight of stairs take you from one place to another. You don't break it down to individual steps. There's too much of that sometimes, and it takes the power out of what these principles are all about. I began to practice this stuff immediately, at least the second time through the steps. It helped me to keep going and overcome the fear and resentment that was so powerful as I cleaned up the wreckage of my past. And I've continued to do so as time has gone by. I still do so, by the way. I see more clearly in my day-to-day life where I fall short. I have to see it. Others can see it quite clearly, I know that, but I have to see it too. It has to be true to me, or nothing will change, nothing can be done. And if you practice the practice, moment by moment, remarkable things will happen. When the really tough stuff happens, we are able to continue to practice and stay connected almost without thinking about it. There have been many such moments over the years. There was the time at my brother's wedding when I'd been practicing only for a season that I spoke of last week. There was that blue autumn day in November 2006 when the phone call came out of that blue autumn day, and I heard the worst news imaginable, the worst thing that could have happened. Ethan's mother called me to tell me he'd been killed on the way to school. My heart broke that day. I turned to my God. I went to the hospital. I was there for his mum and the family, and then I had to walk away alone. And what did I do? I turned to my God and to the people who could help me. I never lost the connection, but I suffered extreme grief, and that grief did change me. And throughout that time, I was able, though, to be there for others, even though my heart was broken. I did more 12-step work in that year than at any other time in my recovery. It was just there. I needed to do it, but the gift was there, and I did it. I did not turn away from life. Broken hearted, but I did not turn away from life. There have been other challenging times too, such as family funerals, when I've had to practice these principles even more intensely in order to do what I am here, or what I was there to do, as I carried my family through their grief. There's been much fear, resentment and intense feeling at different times in my recovery, but I have kept on practicing. Every time I have come through a difficult time, the spiritual awakening has deepened. It's almost incredible experiences come actually if you practice, if you keep going faithfully, moment by moment, if you continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness, understanding of this life and the spiritual life, and living more spiritually alive, and effectiveness, how we live that life in this real world, feet on the ground, in the earth, grounded as a finite, frail human being at times, but real. There was that day of my stepbrother's inquest, following the loss of his life by his own hand, of being able to be there for my loved ones in deeply painful times, just being there together. There was nothing I could do other than to sit with them, listen to them, be present and hold them when they needed to be held, as I held my youngest sister. That day, that terrible day, as we listened to those words from the coroner. So many other occasions too, some of which I mentioned last week. Looking at the challenges of the last year as well, when we've had to live so differently and under pressure at times. It's been tough, hasn't it? I'm sure we've all struggled at times as we've fought and wrestled and adjusted and readjusted. I know I have, but I've kept on practicing the practice, moment by moment, and I've lived this year as much as I've ever lived. New experiences, some of them amazing. Through it all I have stayed free, and I have stayed connected, even under extreme pain and suffering, in the depths of grief and brokenness. And in that time I have not had a serious thought about a drink or any mind or mood altering substance of any kind. I have truly connected with the power. Since I truly connected with the power, I've not had a serious thought of a drink or a drug or any mood or mind altering substance all these years. It's just never been there. This stuff works under any and every condition. I know this to be an absolute fact. I am living, breathing proof of this. The promises of Step 10 are 100% true. Every word of them. Step 10 contains the real promises of recovery. Remember that the subtitle of the book is The Story of How Many Thousands of Men and Women Have Recovered from Alcoholism. Alcoholism was thought to be a hopeless condition of mind and body. We were powerless, but we have accessed the power through recovery. We were insane with regards to alcohol, but by accessing the power, we have been restored to sanity. That's what it means to be recovered from alcoholism. The two greatest myths in recovery are that we suffer from perpetual powerlessness and never-ending recovery. That we will somehow always be powerless and that we will always be recovering. This is simply untrue. The point of recovery is to find a power by which you can live and to live by that power. Thus, you overcome your problem, lack of power. You don't suffer that dilemma any longer. Yes, of course, you must develop the relationship with the power, or of course, you will become powerless again. You must continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness, which is what Step 10 is all about, by the way. Here are those promises on page 84 to 85. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see how a new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. This is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. I will repeat that. So long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Remember, we have recovered. The promise is that we now react sanely and normally. We are not fighting. We feel safe and protected. The problem has been removed. The key, though, is to keep on practicing our practice, moment by moment, like the Karate Kid, waxing on, waxing off, waxing on, waxing off. Just practice the practice. It's simple, really. We don't force it. You can't force it. It just comes. This is the miracle of it. And for some people, it's not just about not fighting anything or anyone. For some people, it's about not fleeing, because you can be at war with life by fleeing life. In many ways, that's what I did. Recovery is about taking responsibility for what is yours to be responsible for in life. Not playing the director, but fully playing your role in life. Fulfilling what you're here to do, to serve God and the people around you, however you understand God. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. It's a daily reprieve as well. Really vital to remember. It's a moment reprieve, really. So, in order to maintain recovery, what do we have to do? Well, we have to continue to grow spiritually. To maintain, we have to grow. There's no standing still in this. If you're standing still, you're sliding backwards. I think, is it the Keys to the Kingdom story talks about a retrogressive groove. And that's true. You can't idle because you don't stay still. If you're not moving forward, if you're not growing, you're diminishing. And it's about spiritual growth. Growing in understanding and effectiveness in order to maintain sanity around this stuff. How often have I seen people make a very good beginning with recovery? They get all fired up. They get back into life. And then slowly, over time, the malady creeps back in. The renowned psychiatrist and leading supporter of AA in its early days, Harry Tiebout, who's referenced, by the way, in Appendix 3, called this the Reemergence of Ego. What happens is resentment builds as we become spiritually unwell. And Tiebout suggested that what we have to continue to do is to apply and reapply these principles, and that there's a further and deepening surrender that comes. There's not just one surrender, and that's certainly my experience. Some folks say we just need to live on the final 3 steps, what they call those maintenance steps. But I'm not one of those people, actually. I have gone through the book and the process contained within it on several occasions with different people, actually. I might well do so again this year. I think I probably will, maybe in the summer or the autumn. I have a friend who finds someone different to go through the book and the work with each and every year. Now, this is not instead of continual growth through the daily practice. I'm not suggesting that at all. It's as well as. Why wouldn't we want a new experience? Why wouldn't we want to be open to a new experience? Lay aside your prejudice. It's so vital. It's always going to be vital. However long you're around, keep laying aside what you think you know about recovery, about the steps, about the solution, about the God of your own understanding. Keep that open. Humility is vital to recovery, for it allows us to be open to new experiences. So why only do this once? Anyway, that's just my experience, but it's not just mine alone. But there is two schools of thought, and I acknowledge that. Recovery is not about knowledge alone. You can know the book inside out, but still you cannot recover. Self is a cunning and deadly foe, an insidious beast. The ego has many ways to masquerade itself. The key to recovery is humility, because it is humility that opens us up to new possibility. And if we're not open to new things, we will stagnate and die. If we do not continue to grow spiritually, we will soon diminish, wither up, and potentially die. And you may not die from a physical relapse. The illness can destroy you and you don't have to take another drink, though usually people do. And there are those, and I've met them, I've known them, I've been friends with them. There are those who believe that they can outgrow all of this stuff, that they can transcend this stuff and grow to some other new level. That they've reached some special place of transcendence, some special place of enlightenment, where they've grown beyond all this. There is no such place. Human beings are earthbound, they are finite. It's interesting that linguistically the words for human and the earth, the humus, and humility all share the same linguistic root. For it's in the earth, on the ground, among our fellow, among our kin, that we do our work. We transcend nothing. What happens is that we are transformed in this life. But we're always part of this life. That never changes. We are earthbound, finite human beings. We're not gods. The first thing we learn, isn't it? If you want a relationship with God, the first thing you have to do is to understand and accept that you are not God. But God is within you, don't forget that. But you are not God. You are finite. You are not infinite. Always remember that this illness is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's often unseen. It's insidious. I have known 3 different people over the years who have told me that they had reached such a level of enlightenment that they believed that if they drank, it would not affect them. That God would protect them. Not that they would drink, they weren't suggesting they're going to drink, just if they wanted to, that they could. And it would be alright because they'd reached such a level, or that their God would protect them from alcohol, or the physical effects of that. None of them attend meetings any longer. I know of one who is dead. I've no idea what has happened to the other 2. They're not around. Can you see, though, in their thinking, the insidious power of that great obsession? That great obsession that one day you will be able to control and enjoy your drinking. If you have this abnormal reaction, never forget this, you have this for life. No amount of spiritual growth in any other area will ever change that physical factor. You have it for life. The mind is what changes. And the mind changes if we have the spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening, and we continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness. We maintain sanity. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's what this is all about. Our daily reprieve, our freedom from the malady, is dependent upon our relationship with this power. Remember that we are here to serve God and the people around us. It's not the other way around. That's where our work is to be done. Always. So let's have a look at what Alcoholics Anonymous has to say about prayer and meditation. Step 11. Step 11 is practice as we clear up the past, as I've already said, as we make amends, and alongside step 10 as we continue to take personal inventory. Here on pages 85 to 86. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. So the book offers a simple starting point in practicing prayer and meditation, but this is something, of course, that we develop personally. What works for you works for you. The book offers a method of two-way prayer during the evening, in the morning, throughout the day, to be practiced alone or to be practiced with others. And this is vital in order to live the active life of the recovered alcoholic. It works if we continue to practice moment by moment, and of course if we practice with the right attitude. And what's the right attitude? Well, it's that of humility, accepting that we are human, that we are finite, that we need this power to live freely in the world. Also, the attitude is about being here to serve God and the people around us. That commitment, again, I repeat, from step 7. God as director, we as his agent, if you like, doing this work in this world. Again, that commitment in step 7, linking back to step 3 actually, those two foundational prayers. The decision, step 3, the commitment, step 7. And step 11, curiously in the book, begins with the nightly review on page 86. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Now, this nightly review is often talked about as step 10 by those who believe that step 10 is done at the end of the day. But step 10 is practiced constantly. Having said that, so is step 11. Inventory ought never to be left though until the end of the day. That can be very why would you wait the whole of the day to deal with something? Just dangerous actually. The nightly review, which is one aspect of step 11, is to be entered into meditatively and prayerfully in silence. It is a time to reflect on the day that has passed. It's a form of two-way prayer. We ask and we seek answers, humbly opening ourselves to the possibility. It begins and it ends in silence and in prayer. And please use a pen and paper, or use one of those wonderful apps that they have now, if that helps. I do from time to time. As we practice the practice, moment by moment and day by day, so much more is revealed. Now, interestingly, the nightly review is the first thing we look at in step 11. And it makes sense if you think about it logically. We begin practicing 9, 10 and 11 together after completing our step 8 list, and as we go out to live this life in the world, as we clear up the past. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. So that very first evening, we need to be engaging in our very first nightly review. That's why it comes first. Oh, that's what I think. That's why I think it does. I'm sure some clever person might tell me that's not the case, but we can't really ask the authors. They're not here, can we? But what about first thing in the morning? First things first is something that Dr. Bob's wife, Anne Smith, insisted that they practice before they went out carrying the message and saving the world, so to speak. She insisted that they took time in prayerful silence first thing in the morning. It is vital to take time to connect, to be open to the possibility of what the day may bring. This has enabled me to stay connected throughout the day. It's not only about what we do in the morning and what we do in the night, but it is this that allows the constant disciplines to become a part of our being. By bookending them, it helps us practice moment by moment. And it's not easy early. It feels like walking through treacle. Sometimes you kind of got to force yourself. The proper use of the will they talk about in step 10. But eventually it just becomes a natural. It just becomes a part of who you are. Just like Daniel Sam when he was waxing on and waxing off and painting that fence. It just became a part of what he was doing. But you kind of have to sometimes make yourself do it in those early days. But eventually you get restored to sanity. So proper use of the will is what they talk about in step 10. Interestingly, step 10, I don't know if you've noticed, they talk about getting our sanity back and the proper use of the will. We can use our will in the right way if it's aligned with God's will. Never forget that. It's not that we never use our will. We use our will, our gifts, who we are as human beings, but we use them in the right way for the right purpose, not for selfish reasons. Anyway, morning. Here's what they say on pages 86 to 87. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. So much taught there about using our thinking in the right way. If it's under the direction of God in the right way, we have to learn to trust our thinking, our mental faculties, our brains, because nobody can do our thinking for us. That's our task. We have to do it because we have to do the work. You've got to trust your own thinking eventually. It won't always be right, but it will get better. It further suggests that if circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing. There are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. I have found over the years that taking time humbly in silence with others is vital to my recovery. Throughout my recovery I have done this. Early on it was with a group of folk that were non-recovery related, at a place that was literally around the corner from where I lived, and I would go in the morning before going to work, and I'd often go in the evening after work actually. You could just go there and there'd be people there in silence. It was wonderful. It was just a thing I was exploring at the time. Just literally around the corner in a house from where I lived. For the last 11 years, I have attended a 7 a.m. Step 11 meeting twice a week. Well, for a time twice a week anyway. It began just once a week. In that meeting, we read the reading on Step 11. We spend time in pure silence together, and then we share on this step. Initially, it was once a week, but it's now moved to on a twice weekly basis. I cannot begin to tell you how powerful this is. The connections to the God within and the God in all of life, it helps me connect to that. And it's this that enables me to be open to that still, small voice that speaks within life through life, that voice that is somehow less than a whisper, but somehow more than silence. In so doing, over time, you begin to trust your own thoughts. As your thought, as it becomes this consciousness, becomes a working part of your mind. That said, you keep practicing, and please do check this out with others, because not every thought is going to be inspirational. I promise you that. Some of those thoughts may well be based in self-absorption. But as you keep on practicing moment by moment, if you practice the practice, inspiration will come more often, but not always. So do check it out. But you can't check every thought out. But the really important stuff, keep checking with someone who will understand and be unaffected. I had a good example a couple of years ago with something that I thought was for the good of all, but actually it was more about relieving my conscience of some guilt. It took me a few conversations with my sponsor actually for me to discover the truth of that, but I got there. Self is very powerful, an insidious beast at times. But with regards to step 11, explore. There's a whole world of knowledge and experience out there. Please be free and explore. Keep open to new ideas. Lay aside your prejudice and keep laying aside your prejudice, particularly around the concept of God or a higher power or a power greater than yourself or whatever word you want, or no words at all. Just explore, stay open. Keep not just your mind but your heart and your spirit and your soul. AA is only offering a starting point for this stuff. And remember, we always begin with our own conception, and we grow in understanding in this area so long as we stay open. But go ask the experts, those who know more about this than we do. There's so much you can learn. But having said all that, if we were just to put this simple stuff into practice with humility and openness, amazing things do happen. You will grow in understanding and effectiveness. You will continue to wander down that broad, inviting highway. I most certainly have. And who knows where that broad, inviting highway will lead. What I guarantee you is one heck of a trip. Better than any drink or drug that you could ever imagine. So let the awakening continue. But remember, it's a broad, inviting highway is recovery. Recovery never talks about narrow paths. People do, but recovery does not. It's a broad, inviting, welcoming highway. It just wants you to be on the road of happy destiny, doesn't it? So get on the trip, man. It's amazing. Have a look at step 12 then, shall we? There's a lot to look at here and there's not a lot of time. There is a danger in merely practicing the first 11 steps. The whole point of the program is how we serve God and the people about us. If we do not go out to the world, then it's still all about us. In fact, if we are not interested in going out to help others, I suggest that we have not experienced a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Here's what Bill had to say in his story following his spiritual experience, what he always described as his white light moment there in Towns Hospital, a few days sober. But more than just the white light experience happened, and sometimes that can get missed. Following this experience, Bill had gone from someone who never thought about anybody else, apart from that brief moment just before his final surrender when he thought about the good things he'd given to his wife. He was utterly self-absorbed, whether it was about his success or just trying not to drink. But something changed within him. His feet grasped a new soil. This is about destruction of self-centeredness, yeah? simple, not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness, which is not the destruction of us as a person, ourself, if you like that. No, it's about the real emergence of the true personhood through the spiritual experience. But through that, something changes in our attitude toward life and the world around us. Bill went from being someone who's utterly dominated by just himself to being dominated by this desire to help those who still suffered. And it's there in his story on page 14. Here's what he said after being visited by the doctor. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. His whole attitude has turned completely around, a revolutionary change. It didn't mean he was a perfect person. He suffered and he got a lot wrong in his life, but he had something else to live for other than self. His roots grasped a new soil. He lived from a different place. That's what it's all about. Now, I want to make an important point on step 12, which states, just to read the actual step, the shorthand if you like, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, not a result of these steps, which is how the step has been altered in some fellowships. If you look at them, they're different in some fellowships. But it's the result of these steps. There's meaning one result, not more than one result. The sole purpose of the steps is to bring about a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience as the one and only result of the steps. Why? Because it's this that brings us into conscious relationship with the power, a God of our own understanding. And this is shown in our experience of life and our attitude towards life and how that changes and how we live in the world changes, going back to what Bill shared from his story. The purpose of the 12 steps is to bring about a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience. It's usually a mixture of the two. If I look back in my experience, I've had moments of enlightenment, but generally it's over time things have changed. But there has been special moments too along the way. Usually after I've gone through a difficult period and I've practiced, I've kept waxing on and waxing off throughout that challenging time, and a new awakening sometimes suddenly happens. But other times it's a realization. It's the spiritual experience or the spiritual awakening that brings us into conscious relationship with a power greater than ourselves. And it's this conscious relationship that transforms our experience of life. What they call living in the fourth dimension of existence, if you like. Living in a different way. The spiritual experience discussed in Appendix 2 is more, though, than just a change in attitude and experience of life, although it is that as well. As it states on pages 567 to 568. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness, the essence of spiritual experience. Just think about that. The spiritual experience is more than a personality change. It is a growing awareness or a growing consciousness of this power in our lives. We don't need to go looking for it either. It's there within us. It's a part of everything. It's a part of you and me. You see, our problem has been that we've been blocked off from this for too long. And that's the spiritual malady, if you remember the second video. Remember, it's not that our spirit is sick or that we are sick individuals, that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. That's not the case. It's merely that we've been blocked off, or we've blocked ourselves off from the spirit. Really important to understand this. So many believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. I believe that about myself for so long. There isn't. We're just blocked off. And actually that belief that there's something fundamentally wrong with you will be a great barrier to forming a relationship with God, because you will feel unworthy. Overcome that prejudice, please do. I believed for so long. I used to say I was an atheist or agnostic, really. I was a nihilist, really. But actually, when I faced up to the truth, what I really believed was that God would want nothing to do with someone like me. That there was something fundamentally wrong with me. It's just not true. But I believed that for so long. I had to lay that prejudice aside too. Thank God I did. Now, most folk don't feel ready to pass on what has been so freely given them, but pass it on we must. Working with others is a vital part of the program. As soon as you start to make amends and begin to have a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, it's time to start learning how to pass this on to those who still suffer. From page 89. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember that they are very ill. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other's is the bright spot of our lives. But please remember just how ill folk are. They're suffering from a severe illness, a malady, a fatal malady. Remember that and be patient and tolerant. Practice those principles. And I have to say, there is no greater joy than watching those around you recover, to see a fellowship grow up all around you and to be a part of that fellowship on that ship of love sailing together. We have something incredibly powerful to offer the still suffering alcoholic, something beautifully unique through sharing our experience of the illness and our recovery from the illness, and sharing our knowledge gained both of the problem and the solution. It's the combination of experience and knowledge. You can have experience but no knowledge. That's of no use to anybody, really. You put a room full of people in a room who have no knowledge of the solution, they're not going to get well. And you can have all the knowledge in the world but no experience, and you can't make that connection. It's the combining of the two, and the two coming together. As two come together to share that together, the power comes alive. This is fellowship in action. This is the power of recovery. Here's a little bit from the foreword to the second edition of the book, describing AA's birth in Akron, pages XVI to XVII. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Vital to permanent recovery. And isn't permanent recovery, what we are seeking. By the way, vital comes from the Latin vitale, meaning life-giving. We have vital organs, don't we? If your vital organs pack in, what happens to you? Well, you die. Well, as an alcoholic, my life depends upon constantly carrying this message to others. This is a vital part of my recovery. That's where the power truly comes to life. It comes to life in that sacred space where we carry this message to one another, sharing experience and knowledge, offering strength and hope. This combined together is when the power comes alive. This is fellowship in action. Vital to permanent recovery. That's what the deal is, folks. If you want it, you can have it. But you've got to practice the practice. You have to work for it. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. It's not a suggestion, that is it. It's a must. It's vital. Cannot live without it. In the darkest days of my life, in the times of real struggle, I have found myself working with more folk than at any other time. This year's been busy. Yes, I've had to adjust how I do that by using Zoom, etc. to sponsor, not really doing things face to face. But it works just as well. Over the years, I reckon I've taken 75 folk through the work. By now, probably about that. About half have remained sober, living good lives, helping others, getting on with their own lives. About half have not. I know of at least 4 who have died. I'm sure there's probably more than 4 actually. I don't know for sure because I can't be certain because I've not seen them. They're not around, but I would guess that more have. And the truth is that some folk cannot face up to the truth about this malady. They cannot see the truth about themselves. They are not at fault. They cannot face up to the truth of this malady, and that is a requirement to get free and to stay free. We have to grow in that area too. In chapter 7, working with others, there are lots of do's and don'ts. It's important to remember, of course, that the book was written before meetings really existed. There were a couple, maybe 3 at the most. So in those days, they didn't meet the newcomer in the meeting. They had to go out and find them. So some of the chapter might not seem relevant, but actually the principles are. The principles can still be adapted in how we carry the message both within the fellowship and outside there too. Please go out to the world if you can, although I don't think they'd appreciate it at the moment, perhaps, in the current climate. But here are some principles of guidance here, an example on page 91 of how we should talk to the still suffering, the newcomer, those that want this. At first, engage in general conversation. After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. If he is in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralise or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. One of the mistakes we make with newcomers or people returning is that we talk at them incessantly. Sometimes we even pin folk in the corner of the room. It certainly happened to me. We tell them what they need to do, and perhaps we attempt to frighten them sober. It very rarely works. And I think we're particularly like that in those early days when we're all fired up and impassioned and we want to save the whole world and think that we can, I suppose. I remember being that man, I can assure you, hands up there to that. And don't get me wrong, I'm as passionate tonight these days as I always are. I have a real passion for this stuff, and maybe more passionate, but hopefully I'm just less intense. People tell me I am. I'm not as scary as I used to be. Thank God for that, eh? Another thing I've learnt is that carrying this message is as much about listening as it is about talking. In fact, it's probably more about listening. Open our ears. Yeah, open our ears. And that's the case just as even when you've been around a long time and been doing this, you still need to listen. I was taught to practice listening. And the way to do that is when people are talking, watch your listening really. Notice when you stop listening, when you start to criticise or you start to pull apart what people are saying. Watch that and re-engage with practice listening. It's like waxing on and waxing off, but do it with listening too. We need to pay attention when we engage with folk, not just lecture them. I know this might appear like a lecture, but this is a share. We should not assume that people understand the lingo we use. Most folk don't when they're new around, so explain what we mean by the words. Don't just say the words. Say what the words mean. And when we're engaging with others by listening to them, it enables us to adapt how we approach that person. We need to put ourselves in their shoes. Yes, the message is the same. The message I carry is the same. But I adapt how I do that. How do I know that? I've only learned that from experience. And one thing you cannot give someone is experience. We need that, and it's that personal human contact is so vital, so life-giving. Knowledge of this material, this book, is not enough in and of itself. You combine experience with knowledge. There's such a power that comes alive when we sit down face to face with another, whether that's in person or it's through a screen or even through the post actually. Do you know, in the early days of AA, in the back of the book there's a wonderful story of one of the pioneers in a province of Canada where he was completely on his own. There was no one else in recovery. There was no one for him to help him. So what did they do? They sponsored him, if you like, through the post. Each day the New York office would write to him as he went through the book and was guided through the work. They kind of sponsored him by the mail. Amazing to... It's in his story. Find that. I can't remember the title of the story, but look it up. You'll find it. And then when he'd gone through it and began to have his awakening, they told him he then had to start an AA group in his own house. And the fellowship grew up all around him. Wonderful story. So we've always had to adapt how we do this, as we've had to do this year. Not wrong with that. It works just as well, I've found. Now there is a warning that is repeated throughout this chapter, and it's the danger of depending too much on what we often say in the rooms is people, places and things, and that includes your sponsor, the person guiding you. First things first, we must depend on this power and nothing else. And I learnt the dangers of allowing people to depend on you in those very early on actually, with a guy I tried to help who became too dependent on me, and by the time I'd seen this it was too late to do anything about it and he had to move on to somebody else. Our dependency must always be on the God of our limited understanding. Yes, we as alcoholics must be willing to go to any lengths with regards of our own recovery, but so must the still suffering. And I don't depend on people. I live in fellowship, I'm part of fellowship, I live in community, but that's not the power that I depend upon. Why? Because people are finite. They will let you down. They won't mean to, but they will. They're human. They're finite. They're not entirely dependable, actually. It's important to help where appropriate, but it's also important to be careful that the person you are trying to help does not become dependent upon you, because if they do, you're blocking them from their relationship with their own God of their own understanding. You're aiding in their destruction, not in their recovery. As they state on page 98, it is not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give. That often makes a difference between failure and success. The minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. He clamours for this or that, claiming he cannot master alcohol until his material needs are cared for. Nonsense. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn the truth. Job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence on God. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is that he trust in God and clean house. I love that those one-word sentences that appear in the book. Nonsense. I think they're making quite a powerful point there, aren't they? Recovery is about how we live in the rough and the tumble of life, dealing with challenging situations and challenging people, behaving appropriately, and then dealing with ourselves afterwards, taking care of our personal spiritual needs. Waxing on and waxing off. I love what they say here on page 130. Our feet ought to be firmly planted on earth. That is where our fellow travellers are, and that is where our work must be done. These are the realities for us. We have found nothing incompatible between a powerful spiritual experience and a life of sane and happy usefulness. You will go through many joys, tragedies, celebrations, fallow periods where you feel like nothing is happening, and every experience between all that. This is life. But it's got nothing to do with being alcoholic. This is just real life. Sometimes people think that because they are in recovery, that somehow they don't have to experience the things that other people experience in life. That's just not the case. I would add a one-word sentence there. Nonsense. Here's what they say on page 102, and when they state it, I get it. Your job now is to be at the place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others, so never hesitate to go anywhere if you can be helpful. You should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such an errand. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed. But it's not suggesting here that you will not have to face the same difficulties that other human beings have to face. No, what it's saying is that if we are spiritually fit and living this life in service to God and the people around us, that we will be safe and protected from relapse. But we won't be immune from life. If you think otherwise, then I suggest to you that you are still self-centered. We have to live in the same world as everyone else does. We are not some special ordained person, that some selected special people above the rest of the world. We are not that. We're human beings, finite human beings, just like everybody else. Please watch out for that thinking, because it can prove deadly. There's loads of design for living stuff in the later chapters. I particularly love the family afterwards. It repeats the spiritual principles of recovery in slightly different ways. And these are the spiritual principles that we are meant to practice in all of our affairs. And they kind of link back to those words in chapter 6 referring to what some people call living amends, the continuing amends. There is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. The key to this is to remember first things first, to work on the spiritual principles and not to point out where others are wrong. What we are is an example to others. We take the lead in living this life. Remember, we're not the only folk who suffer from a spiritual malady. But while remembering that, Also remember that we're not there to point the finger where others fall short. We're there to be an example, to take the lead. This is why it is so vital to work on consideration for others. To me, that's the most important spiritual principle to work on. Work on consideration for others, work on patience, work on tolerance, work on love, work on not criticising others or just causing arguments. I love this line on page 98. This couple of sentences, just say it all really. Though his family be at fault in many respects, he should not be concerned about that. He should concentrate on his own spiritual demonstration. Argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. And when they say avoided like the plague, they are not mincing their words here. And we're in a world, it's sadly, where argument and fault finding is what we do all the time. If you don't believe me, spend an hour on social media. We're here to demonstrate how to live, not point the finger at everybody else. Doesn't mean that we're passive in the world, but just pulling people down is not helpful to anybody. People don't listen to you anyway. They just think you're criticising, so it defeats the object anyway. What we need to do is to continue to live the life day by day by these simple principles. Remember, giving what we can, and by doing so, we maintain our spiritual condition. First things first is vital. Cannot live without it. I was told, and it's proved to be true, that if you are spiritually well, the rest will get taken care of. But your job is to be spiritually well. That's what you need to work on. That's what first things first is about, isn't it? And you know what? This has proved to be 100% true. But this life is not grim. It is filled with joy. It is filled with freedom. It is filled with happiness. The spiritual awakening sets you free from the bondage of self, from your own chains. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Isn't that Rousseau said that? Well, it's certainly true for the alcoholic, and I think it's true for most folk. He was saying that about everybody, by the way. We impose those chains upon ourselves. And what's a good sign of recovery? Well, surely recovery is not a life in which we are stupid, boring and glum, is it? No, I hope not. To be in good health is to be in good humour. That is literally true, you know. That's what the word comes from. They are linguistically linked. Humour is linked to good health. It's not actually linked to humanity, although it would be nice if I'm being humble. But it does sound like it is, but actually that's not true, but it does sound good. It's linked to humour and health are linked together. In medieval times, this was literally the case. The word humour comes from an old word, humere. It was believed that each person had 4 humeres that flowed, these kind of liquids, coloured liquids, that flowed through their bodies. And these humeres needed to be in balance in order for a person to be in good health. So to be in good humour meant to be in good health. And it's still the case today, isn't it? To be in good humour is a sign that you're in good health. Certainly a sign in recovery that you haven't got your head up your bum and lost up there in that smelly, dark place, that you're in good health, living in the world, head up, being a part of life. Here's what it says anyway on pages 132 to 133. Surely these are signs of a healthy recovery. We have been speaking to you of serious, sometimes tragic things. We have been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspect, but we aren't a glum lot. If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. We try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nations, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. When we see a man sinking into the mire that is alcoholism, we give him first aid and place what we have at his disposal. For his sake, we do recount and almost relive the horrors of our past. But those of us who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others find we are soon overcome by them. So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. Outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over a seemingly tragic experience out of the past. But why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered and been given the power to help others. This is the ultimate promise of recovery. I repeat, we have recovered and been given the power to help others. This is the life, and what a life. The promise and the purpose of recovery. This is the deal, man. Love and service, both working together in and through us. God is love and comes alive through self-giving love, which is essentially what service is. I turn to God for the love, and the love comes alive through my actions. We get our hands down in the dirt. We get mucky, because that's where the work is, in the muck of life. Sometimes it's going to be hurt more than you can ever imagine, but it will be also be beyond anything, beyond beautiful too. For you're going to be alive in life itself. Something that will touch something beyond anything you could have ever begun to imagine. You will feel the nearness of your Creator. You will be in conscious contact, conscious relationship with God. This is the realm of the Spirit. This is the fourth dimension of existence. In real life, experienced here in the earth, earthbound, finite, humble human beings. The spiritual awakening will continue. You will continue to awaken to a new freedom and a new happiness over and over again if you continue on and on practicing the practice, living by these simple principles, waxing on, waxing off, living this life. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it, and it's about living it. Each morning I awaken and I wake up with total acceptance of those three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought. I then turn to the solution and let love, and I live in love and I live through it. I open myself to all that is life. I give myself wholeheartedly to God and the people around me. I retake that 12-step commitment. I wholeheartedly give myself away, and in so doing I begin to become all that I was born to be. God comes alive in my fragile, finite human being. How? By serving God and the people around me. And by doing so, it's not that I let God in. I let God out through me, through my fragile human life. I pour out that love on a world that needs it. And it begins with my fellows. And I let them do that to me too. Lavish one another with that love. I have a still mind and a full heart. That's what it's all about. They put it so beautifully in the final two paragraphs of the book on page 164, at least the program part of the book. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. What an ending. What an ending. And it's so true. And we just keep on that road. Keep on that road. And it's the road of happy destiny. So by being on the road, you're already in it. The promised land that is recovery, if you like. So thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I have. I have loved sharing my experience and my knowledge of recovery through this incredible book that is Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope you have gained strength. I hope you have gained hope, if you like, from this. But that's it for now. So may God bless us all. Let's stay free. Let's keep on rocking in the free world. All you groovers and you shakers out there. Enjoy yourselves. Stay free.